Rest in peace to my motherfucker.
I reminisce on dangerous summers, was just a thug nigga working for drug dealers in neighborhood. Run about the age of 13, we was gunning and it was fun to see the police running. Niggas disappear when we come and live.
What's up guys, Kenan from kenanK TV here, and welcome back to another video. In this video, I want to go over the Jon Jones vs Alexander Gustafsson fight and assume what would have happened if Alexander was to go in there and defeat Jon Jones. With that being said, let's jump right into the video. The way I can see Alexander Gustafsson defeating Jon Jones is by obviously doing what he did well in the first fight. Now, what did he do well? Alexander possesses a couple of tools that most of Jon Jones' opponents do not possess. Alexander is 6'5", taller than Jon Jones, has a 79-inch reach, 6 inches shorter than Jon Jones, while Jon Jones obviously has one of the longer reaches in the entire UFC, probably has the longest reach in the UFC period. But besides that, the fact of the matter remained that Jon Jones had never really fought somebody of Alexander's size, and that was really apparent. And ever since that fight, he hasn't really fought anybody of his size again. The fact that Jon Jones was always used to fighting people that were smaller than him, essentially blown up middleweights. For example, Lyoto Machida, Vitor Belfort, Chael Sonnen, all these guys that were at that time's division, at that time's light heavyweight division, were not really optimal for that weight class. Jon Jones was the only real fighter with the perfect frame for the division, and he really used it to its full extent. Fighters needed to come at Jon Jones because they were smaller, they had to close in the distance, which gave Jon Jones always that one step ahead mentality or edge, if you want to call it. Once he was in there with Gustafsson, that entire dynamic had changed. Now he had to fight somebody that was playing that game on him, and that really confused him in my opinion. That really confused him, and it created a lot of openings that Jon Jones would have not even thought about giving up. For example, him going for kicks and always keeping that distance. But against Gustafsson, when he kicked, Gustafsson was able to catch that kick and immediately shoot for a takedown. You see, those are the type of things that against a shorter fighter would have easily worked to maintain distance, but once he was in there with Gustafsson, that did not work anymore. So one thing that Gustafsson has to do is immediately work on that outside game. Once he can make Jon Jones worry about him being on the outside, once he can make Jon Jones come at him, that in itself is already a good start to begin with. Because if he's the outside fighter, he's going to make Jon Jones think about how he's going to be able to close the distance and then attack. All that Gustafsson has to worry about is how am I going to counter fight and how am I going to start off my own attacks. That in itself is a good way to start the fight in my opinion. With Jon Jones talking about him and improving his boxing, for example, I still believe that he's going to be relying on kicks heavily as they worked tremendously in the first fight. Now, one thing that worked against him when he was kicking was the fact that Gustafsson was able to catch kicks, I think twice. So once Gustafsson finally gets the fight to the ground, assuming that he does get the fight to the ground by catching a leg kick, he has to work on the floor. He has to work on pinning Jon Jones down, and he has to work on his stamina. Just wear him down a bit. That is probably asking something unusual from Gustafsson, but at the end, he has to do something that he has not done prior in the first fight, because that is what I believe led to him not winning the fight. I felt like in the first fight, he did not do enough. He did great in spots, but that was just it. He did great in spots and he did not adapt. The things that worked for him were things that Jon Jones adapted to and turned it around and made it work in his favor. So definitely adjusting and adapting to the fight is something that Gustafsson has to worry about and definitely needs to work on. The fact, however, of him saying that he has already won the first fight and he's kind of brushing aside whatever Jon Jones did in the fight is not a good sign in my opinion for now. I hope to see him talk about the things that he didn't do well and tries to improve on it. But one thing, like I said, that he definitely needs to do is adapt to the fight. I talked about him being defensive and countering Jon Jones and letting him come at him and countering takedowns by catching the kicks and driving him to the floor and to the mat and grounding him out on the floor. But he cannot just stick to that. He tried to do that in the first fight and we saw how Jon Jones was able to adapt and still be able to work off of that and win the fight. What he needs to do is be a lot more aggressive. Just being defensive minded is not a good thing against Jon Jones, because the more time you give Jon Jones, the more he's going to start to use his brain and more openings that he can create. But however, if you try to mix it up and pressure him sometimes and make him go on the outside and definitely drive him up against the cage and try to work away from that, that is already giving a new dynamic to the fight and a new approach that Jon Jones needs to worry about. The more Gustafsson can make Jon Jones think about and freeze in the moment, the better it is for him, because the better punches that he landed in the first fight were the ones that he made Jon Jones freeze in. Will he be able to freeze Jon Jones in the rematch? We'll just have to wait and see, but that is how I can see him winning the fight. By decision, by switching up tempos and dynamics in the fight, sometimes going on the offense, sometimes going on the defense, and definitely that is the way to go. We saw that he can take Jon Jones down, so that should be already a threatening factor to use up against Jon Jones. We saw how Daniel Cormier did, and he tried to go for takedowns, but that was not really it. But Gustafsson is not a Daniel Cormier. He's not 5'9", 5'10". He's taller than him. If he can make Jon Jones come at him, the chances of him catching kicks and driving him to the mat like that are a lot higher than actually Daniel Cormier being able to do that. But yeah, that is how I can see Alexander Gustafsson winning the fight.
I lost myself inside of you, only to realize that I'd fall too.
This would mean that in the end, Alex was able to win the UFC gold, something that he had come up short in twice. However, immediately the question that follows that is, who is next? Who will he be fighting next? Who is he going to be defending his belt against? At this stage of the light heavyweight division, the competition is pretty stale. We have Volkan Ozdemir and Anthony Smith as the top guys, as the top contenders in the division. Maybe we have Ilir Latifi too, but a fight between them seems pretty unlikely at this stage. As a rising contender, we may have Dominic Reyes, but I don't want to count on him just yet, and he seems too far in the rankings to begin with. So once Gustafsson becomes the champion, the division is going to be pretty stale. We may have a third fight, which is probably the most logical fight to make if the fight ends up being another close war like the first one was. Definitely a trilogy is something that I would want to see if Gustafsson was to go in there and defeat Jon Jones. And if a trilogy happens, and if Gustafsson was to win that trilogy fight as well, then the only fight that would be there for him left, that is a big fight, is a rematch with Daniel Cormier. I assume by that point, Daniel Cormier is probably retired as a fighter, but who knows? He may just come back for another big fight if the Brock Lesnar fight doesn't seem to fall through. So him going up against Daniel Cormier is another good fight that he can make. Daniel could go in there and challenge for the light heavyweight crown once again, and possibly beat the man that beat Jon Jones, who beat him. So in the end, whether it is a trilogy fight with Jon Jones, whether it's a teammate versus teammate fight with Ilir Latifi, whether it is just defending his belt against a regular contender in Anthony Smith, if Gustafsson can get the belt, I don't think he can be a bad champion. I think he's a fighter's fighter, and I do believe that he will be willing to fight anybody that the UFC is putting in front of him. For Jon Jones, if he's to lose the fight, I really think that the only fight that he has to make is a rematch, the trilogy fight with Alexander. If he goes in there and he loses that fight, then that's a really bad look. I don't know how he would be able to recover from that, since the rest of the division is pretty stale. For him to lose back-to-back to Gustafsson, if he were to, the only way for him to rebuild his legacy is by moving up to heavyweight and fight those guys up there. I heard Cain Velasquez is coming back to fight Francis Ngannou. We have Stipe Miocic up there too, Francis Ngannou, JDS, Alistair Overeem, maybe even Brock Lesnar, who knows. So definitely if Jon Jones were to come in there and lose against Gustafsson and he loses a trilogy fight, the only way for him to continue on with his career is by moving up to heavyweight and see what is up there. So with that being said, leave what you guys think in the comment section down below. As always, I am Kenan from kenanK TV, signing off. Later.